Hey, good morning, everybody. I just want to do a really quick tutorial here, going over how to protect your API keys for making calls from FlutterFlow. I had done a tutorial a few weeks ago, kind of briefing over this. However, that tutorial was geared towards folks that either A, wanted to protect API keys for individual users. So, in other words, if you, for some reason, wanted to assign a key to each of your users, which can be useful depending on what you're doing. Um, I've used it for a couple of my projects. So if for some reason you need to delegate those keys individually, and you're generating them dynamically for your users, then that would be one method that you could use, which again was that other tutorial that I did a few weeks back. We'll show you how to do that. So that's kind of what that was geared towards. Another reason or another purpose behind that tutorial was for FlutterFlow developers who didn't want to necessarily dive into the cloud side of things. So that would be like Google Cloud, getting into the more technical related aspects of things. If you wanted to stay strictly within Firebase and you did not want to have to dive outside of Firebase to try and configure like your IAM permissions and things like that, then that other tutorial was definitely geared towards, I guess, entry level developers into FlutterFlow and Firebase. However, there is a far more efficient way to do this, and I've been wanting to put this tutorial together for a little while, just haven't had time. I finally caught a break today, so I'm just going to throw this together really quickly. It's very short and straightforward. This is just an overview, so you will have to kind of dig in and play around with it some to figure out how it works best for you, but this will at least get you pointed in the right direction. Now, again, this is assuming you're using Firebase. If you're using Supabase, I would assume Supabase has some sort of keychain or key management system. I don't know if they do. You would know better than I do if you use Supabase. And maybe they have some sort of cloud function. I don't know. So this may or may not be applicable to you if you're using Supabase, but maybe it'll give you some idea of what to do going forward. Now, I will say that for those of you that have repeatedly asked me to do tutorials on Supabase or to answer questions about Supabase, I do not use Supabase and I never will. If you would like to know my reasons why, you're welcome to reach out to me directly and I'll be happy to tell you. But I'm not going to use Supabase or do any sort of tutorials on Supabase. Now, if you would like to know why I use Firebase, I will reiterate what I've said many times in the past. Firebase is very useful for getting started with FlutterFlow. It's also very useful for iterating quickly to your MVP app or your internal testing app. But I would never recommend using Firebase or Supabase or virtually any other low and no code backend that you do not have direct control over for your public offering deployment and your ongoing deployments to be able to scale efficiently and in a cost-effective way. So at some point we are going to dive in much deeper into back-end deployments and what that looks like and what my recommendations are and how best to manage that. But that is not what we're doing today. So let's just go ahead and take a look here real quick of how to manage your API keys so that you do not hard code them into your app. I don't care if your API key is quote unquote encrypted or whatever other measures you believe you're taking to protect it. Do not, under any circumstances, ever hard code your key into your app. That is just, it's like a bad mistake 101 for app developing. So just don't do it. Take a little bit of time to learn how to protect it and do it the right way. So, all right. So what we'll be dealing with, again, I'm not gonna write any functions here. I'm not gonna deploy any. This is not what that's about. But I will show you what you kind of need to have inside of your function to be able to call up your API key. So, obviously, inside of FlutterFlow, if you were using their API call creator here, if you were to take the route of hard coding your API key, which again is just not a wise thing to do, then you would probably put it in the header as some sort of auth bearer or token. And then you would, create your body, whatever that may be. If it is anything, you would set up your endpoint and you'd make your call directly from FlutterFlow with all of your information, and it would just be point A to point B on your API call. But because we want to not store our keys inside of our app, then we're going to use a cloud function. And so you can think of our cloud function, our Firebase cloud function, as kind of like a proxy. So we're actually going to make an HTTP call to our cloud function. Our cloud function is going to validate our key against our key store, and then it's going to forward that call onto the actual endpoint. There's a couple of ways that you can store your API keys using cloud function. You can store it as a variable of the cloud function, so you can actually program it directly into essentially a lock file inside of your cloud function. See if we can pull that up here. You could do it like in git ignore, or you could do like a lock file somewhere in here, or like a bin file, and you could have your let's see if we go back here. It doesn't look like I actually have that in here anywhere, but you could have your actual API key stored that way and just call it up as a variable. But the problem is you're still essentially hard coding it into your function. It may not be hard coded in the front facing UI of your app, but it's still hard coded somewhere, so that it's still not an ideal method to do it that way. It's a feasible method, but if you're going to take the time to secure your key, you may as well just skip that and go right ahead into securing it with a key manager if you have access to that. So to store with our key manager, let's go back to Firebase. All right, so the first thing then we want to do is we actually want to go to Google Cloud, which you can access that right here if you want to. There's different ways to get to it, but I'm just going to go from here. And then first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go up here to search. I'm going to type in secret, and I'm going to go to my secret manager and go ahead and enable that. Now, of course, make sure that if you're using any of these things with Google Cloud, that you check out their pricing and everything like that. You do want to make sure that you check out all of their pricing and stuff like that, because Google Cloud definitely charges for almost everything that you activate in here. So you want to make sure you know what you're getting into. All right, so before we actually create a key and set all this up, we need to define some IAM permissions over here. So go over to your IAM and admin. And this up here, I am going to open it in a separate window. So it's going to be the permissions for my project, which is called AppRocket. So I've got a bunch of different profiles through here for different permission settings, but the one that I'm looking for is the one that's directly associated with my app, which is going to be somewhere in here. Let's see here. Looking at it, I feel like I'm staring right at it. It might be this one. No, that's my pub sub. That's not it. Full Bank Daddy. Huh. Must have been something I installed through through Google. Anyway, where is this thing? Thumbnails. Oh, there it is. I ran right past it. Okay, so the one you're going to be looking for, once you get your app set up and deployed through FlutterFlow and connected and everything in here, you're going to have this principal that's should automatically generate in here, and it's going to have AppSpot associated with it, and that's going to be the IAM account that's associated directly with your app. Okay, sorry, I'm just looking through these real quick. Yeah, so AppSpot is going to be the one that we're going to want to grab hold of here, and so you can see it's the App Engine default service account. You can create separate accounts for these and do all sorts of permission settings in here, but I'm not entirely worried about doing that right now. All right, so go ahead and go over here next to the app spot and do your edit principal. And then we're going to assign or add another role to it. Right now it only has editor, so we want to add another one here. And let's see, I believe it's secret. There it is. So you want to add secret manager, secret accessor to this. That way it can access payloads from your secrets. I'm going to save that. Okay, so that's good to go. So you can close that. All right, so now we can create a secret in here. And you'll just want to, give it some sort of name that you can remember to be able to, sorry about that, not test sex. We're not creating a test sex secret here. Sorry. There we go. Whoops. All right. Now you can upload a file if you're uploading this thing as like a JSON file, which that is useful if you are for some reason wanting to interconnect your Firebase projects. So if you wanted to have one project communicating with another project, you could download your admin SDK key as a JSON file, which in the future we're actually going to be going over that and why we would do that and what it's useful for. Obviously not today, but so if you had it like a JSON file that serves as your key and you want to secure it, then you could actually upload it here and do it that way. But what we're doing is we're just going to plug an API key in here, so we don't actually need to do anything beyond that. And for our API key, let's see here. I did want to actually grab a real key. Go back here, and I'm just going to paste my key in here. So this would be my test key that I'm going to use. So you can drop a key in there. And then down through here, you can set this stuff to kind of whatever you want. You can have this manually generate, but I'm actually, since I'm only doing US-based stuff right now, then I would go in here and set this for US only. You can let Google manage the encryption key if you want to, or you can do a customer managed encryption key. I would suggest when you're getting started and kind of doing this and working through it, just let Google manage it for you. Once you get more comfortable and understand what you're doing, then you can manage your own keys. But be careful with that. You do need to make sure that you are adhering to best policies and security policies and everything else. So you can set a rotation period if you want to, as to when you need to rotate these keys out. Set up notifications. You can set up an expiration for when it'll expire, the key. If you do any of that, just make sure that you have protocols in place to replace the key. Otherwise, you're going to have things go offline if you're not prepared to have any sort of method set up to be able to replace those keys in an efficient way. So, but anyway, that's essentially all I'm going to set up is just name it, drop the key in there, and then I'm going to have my replication policy set to US replication only. And then I'll create my secret. All right, so now I've got my secrets created here. I've got a version number. That's important because you can actually version your keys if you want to. So again, if you were to swap keys out, if you were to expire a key and put a new key in, you would obviously want to update your version number. And you can do that. If I were to go here, I could destroy this, and that would destroy this version. It wouldn't necessarily delete this key holder here, because the delete button is what actually deletes the entire container holding this key. Destroying this key just destroys this version. So I could add a new version, in other words. All right. So let me pull up here. It's just an example got going on here. This is from Replicate. This is an example function that I've got for Cloud Functions. So the main things that are relevant to what we're discussing here today. First of all, up here at the top, this has to do with our secrets manager. This is something that you need to install. So this tutorial is assuming that you already know how to set up and deploy your functions with Firebase. So then you should also know how to install stuff. Installing packages, obviously you would go into your functions inside your CLI, and you would npm install this, so that you would have your Google Secret Manager package installed. Now, just kind of as a side reference here, since my function is serving as a proxy between my FlutterFlow app and the actual endpoint, that means that my function needs to be able to make HTTP calls to external endpoints, and therefore I am using Axios as my my HTTP caller. So I'd need to npm install Axios as well. So up here at the top, then this is basically telling my function that I need to use both of these things inside this function. And then down here, this constructs it. So I need to construct my secret manager service client so that I can actually utilize it. And then further down, right here, this is where it's actually going to pull in the payload for that secret and validate it, essentially make sure that it exists and that it's there, and acquire the API key from the secret. And then it'll plug that API key in dynamically down here in my headers for this API call. This is my authorization header token, and then it's going to grab my secret and put it in here dynamically for me before making the call to the endpoint. Now, one thing that's important to being able to acquire your API key from your secret is that you have to tell the code essentially where your secret currently is, what secret you want to call up. So right here, this is a naming segment for where my API key is being held inside of my secrets manager. So secrets, it wants my project name, and then it also wants to reference the versions, which you can just put latest, or you can actually assign a version if you want to. So that version that I just created was version 1, so you can specify it, or you can just put it as latest. That way it updates automatically. That way you don't have to go in here and update your function every time you change your key version. All right, and so if I go back, let's see here, back over here, like I said, in here we need to get this information right here and replace this stuff. So let's go back to our key and go to overview and scroll down here, and here's that line of text that we need. All right. So we want to grab, you can just copy and paste each segment if you want to, but the easiest thing is just to copy the whole line. And then go back here and leave versions and latest. So grab from the left of that and slide over and then paste that in there. So now you have your projects, your project name, which is actually an ID number. It's not really a name. And then your secrets, and then you have your secrets name here, and then versions latest. So now your function knows what secret to reference and where to get it from. And so when you make a call to your function, it'll run through that correctly. Okay, and then it'll wait for that. It'll make sure it's valid, make sure it exists, and then it'll pass that into your authorization header here, and it'll enable you to make your call all the way through. Okay, so pretty simple, pretty straightforward. That's how you create that inside of secrets. And now you just have like your secret manager here. You can edit it, delete it, add a new version, things like that. Just make sure you keep up with all that information as you go along. So I believe that's about it. It's pretty straightforward. Just need to make sure that you call your secret into your cloud function correctly, using that setup that I gave you in there, and then you can define your cloud function around that. And then of course when you go in here, instead of making your API call directly to your endpoint, you would make it to your cloud function, which would look something similar to, let's see here. But go back over here. Since this is an HTTP request, it would be like this. So I could copy this, because the first part of my endpoint all the way up to the / is going to be the same for each project. So I could copy that and then drop that in here, and then whatever my cloud function would be called. So just for reference here, the cloud function for this would be called call vid to vid, because it follows my export. So that's the naming of my function. And so I would just drop that like that. I don't have any defined headers, so it doesn't really matter. I do have a JSON body, but I don't really know what I'm calling up in here at the moment. Let's see. Prompt video and FPS are my body requests, so I could just do, and I'm just showing this to you for reference. We're not actually going to do anything here. So could do stuff like that. So the other one was video. And of course, you can format, make sure it's validated correctly, and where I'd put these prompts, prompt, video, and FPS, you could actually assign variables to that. So you could just do like FPS integer. And then if you come back over here, you could actually just delete that and replace it. And that way it's a variable, and you can assign that number dynamically to the call. I didn't give it a name. Like that. So now you can assign dynamically there. But anyway, so once I would actually fill this information out and make the call to this endpoint, it would go to my function. And then my function would then obviously forward the information onto the actual API call that I'm wanting to make. And depending on how I have my return variables set up, it would return information to me, which on this, I do have response data set up. So it would, the response data from the endpoint would send that response back to my function, and my function would essentially send that back to my FlutterFlow app. So again, think of your function as a proxy to your actual endpoint, so that you can securely store your keys. And when you make an API call from your FlutterFlow app, it's going to your cloud function, and then it's going to your endpoint. Now, again, just a quick overview on this, so you'll want to dive into it a little bit deeper. Something you do want to make sure of, though, when you're setting up HTTP calls to your cloud functions from your app, is that you secure your cloud functions so that they cannot be called externally by somebody else. Because right now, my cloud function does not require any sort of authentication to be able to make a call to it. So in essence, if somebody got a hold of this address here and wanted to ping it with API calls, they could. And they could flood it with calls. And the max instances that I think I can have is 3,000 concurrent instances running at one time. They could ping that thing to death and essentially just cause it to be like a denial of service and freeze your function, and things would stop working. So even though we've secured our endpoint API keys, we still need to secure our function if we're making a direct HTTP call to it. And there are different ways that you can do that, whether it's some sort of dynamic key. The best way to do that, though, would be to have like an authorized header, where only authorized domains are allowed to send calls to it. But that is definitely a conversation for another time, a tutorial for another time. So we're not going to worry about that too much right now, but we can look at it. We can look at it later on. So, all right, hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of how to use a key management system to be able to manage your keys so that you're not hard coding. Yeah, that's all I got for you right now. Be on the lookout. I've got a series coming up that I'm going to be putting out hopefully before too terribly long. And it's going to dive extremely deep into back-end management. We're going to be looking at utilizing server nodes to run our back-end Resources, we're going to be doing some programming with Python and Node.js. We're going to build our own API key server, or I'm sorry, our own API endpoint server. And I'm going to take a look, deeper dive into what I would suggest as your databases. And I say databases plural, not a single database, but it's definitely not Firebase, it's not Supabase. Got some others that I would suggest, and they are all relatively self-managed. So if you're really wanting to dive into app development, then this is something you'll want to definitely check out, because it'll explain the ins and outs of how to best manage your deployments and give you greater control over your back-end resources, your infrastructure, how to balance things, how to make sure things are redundant, be able to have fail-safe protocols in place in case anything goes offline. But it takes you much further beyond simply just drag drop, design a neat looking UI, and then attach some sort of low code database to the back end and then go. Because I mean that'll get you going for a little while, but it's not going to be sustainable forever, both in terms of cost and scalability. So anyway, keep an eye out for that. We'll touch on it more at some point. Okay. Hope this was informative. Have a good day.